The February air of 1944 over the Gulf of Finland was not only permeated with icy moisture, but also with a premonition of the finale. In the cockpit of the heavy bomber Ilyushin 4, there was the smell of frosty ozone, a mixture of high-octane gasoline and pungent makorka, which the navigator smoked right before takeoff, hiding the light in his fist. On the commander's watch, massive aviation instruments with phosphorescent numerals. The hands approached 19 hours. Below, under the wing, stretched the black emptiness of the Baltic. But ahead, somewhere beyond the veil of clouds, Helsinki awaited. A city that, according to the plan in the Kremlin, was to turn into a blazing torch to light Finland's path out of its alliance with Germany. This was not just another sortie. This was a demonstration of the power of long-range aviation, the personal brainchild of Marshal Alexander Golovanov, an ambitious military leader who promised Joseph Stalin to solve a political problem with carpet bombings alone. However, what was supposed to be a triumph of Soviet strategy turned into one of the most mysterious and, perhaps, most hushed-up pages in the history of confrontation in the skies of the North. Before we delve into a detailed analysis of this unique operation, which still causes fierce debate among experts, I invite you to become part of our research community. Subscribe to the channel, give this video an approving rating, and share it with those who appreciate deep military analytics. Your support helps us find rare archival documents and tell stories that for years remained in the shadows of official reports. By the beginning of 1944, the geopolitical situation on the northern flank had reached a critical point. After the lifting of the siege of Leningrad, the Soviet leadership sought to secure its northwestern borders as quickly as possible. Stalin understood that diplomacy works best when it is backed by the roar of hundreds of aircraft engines. The plan was simple and, in its own way, grand: to deliver 3 massive strikes on Helsinki at 10-day intervals. Each wave was to surpass the previous one in power, creating an effect of escalating psychological pressure. Here we see a classic manifestation of the destroyer archetype, where military power is used not to destroy the enemy army, but to demoralize the civilian population and political elite. But behind this grand facade lay systemic problems that historians long preferred not to mention. Alexander Golovanov, a man of iron will and enormous ambition, was in the position of a favorite whose status depended solely on the effectiveness of his units. For him, this operation was a waterline. Either he proves the effectiveness of long-range aviation as an independent strategic tool, or his career would decline. Few notice that at this moment, Soviet aviation was in a state of paradoxical technical transition. On one hand, there were reliable but slow Li-2 and Ilyushin 4, and on the other, American B-25 Mitchells received under the Lend-Lease program, which had excellent navigation but required filigree maintenance. In the headquarters, an atmosphere of nervous anticipation reigned, and at airfields near Leningrad and Murmansk, technicians worked to exhaustion, preparing hundreds of machines for takeoff. The first act of this drama unfolded on the night of February 6th to 7th, 1944. Over 700 aircraft took to the sky, carrying hundreds of tons of high-explosive and incendiary bombs. Soviet reports of the time painted apocalyptic scenes. Huge fires visible for hundreds of kilometers, destroyed government buildings, a paralyzed port. However, if we turn to Finnish archives and objective control data, the picture changes beyond recognition. Out of more than 6,000 bombs dropped, fewer than 400 hit the city limits. How could this have happened? Here, I propose to look at the logistics and psychology of the crews. Historians often debate the reasons for such low accuracy, blaming poor visibility and cloud cover. But the truth lies in the details of the Finnish defense, which proved to be head and shoulders above the expectations of the Soviet command. Finnish Colonel Pekka Jokipaltio, who led Helsinki's air defense, embodied the archetype of the defender trickster. Understanding that his anti-aircraft resources were limited compared to the might of the Soviet armada, he opted not for direct confrontation, but for deception of the senses. The Finns used a system of light traps and false targets. On the islands of Vuosaari, away from residential areas, mock-ups imitating city buildings were constructed and huge bonfires were lit. For Soviet navigators, exhausted by night flights and operating under heavy barrages, these lights seemed like the outskirts of a burning Helsinki. They dropped their payload into deserted forests and the cold waters of the bay, absolutely confident in having completed their mission. This creates one of the key moments of doubt in the official Soviet version. Were the crew's reports deliberate lies, or the result of mass psychological blindness? Most likely we are dealing with the phenomenon of wishful thinking, where reporting to the higher command demanded victories at any cost, and the real methods of confirming hits in night conditions were extremely imperfect. The second wave, which struck the city on the night of February 16th to 17th, was intended to solidify the success. Over 600 aircraft took off. The temperature at an altitude of several thousand meters dropped to -40 degrees Celsius. Pilots, wrapped in heavy fur overalls, struggled with icing on the cockpit windows. Here, another detail of micro-history emerges. Many pilots used ordinary glycerin to at least maintain some visibility through the iced-over glazing, but even this was of little help. By this time, the Finns had deployed the latest German FU-MG-62 Würzburg radars, which allowed them to aim anti-aircraft guns with mathematical precision without visual contact with the target. It was a duel of technology and cunning. Soviet tactics involved the use of flare bombs, chandeliers, which were supposed to illuminate targets. But Finnish anti-aircraft gunners learned to shoot down these flares before they reached maximum brightness, leaving the attackers in complete darkness. It's interesting to consider what you would have done in the shoes of the Soviet command, facing a city that, judging by the flashes below, was burning, but yielding no political result. Finland wasn't asking for peace? Write in the comments whether it was worth continuing these costly raids, or if the tactic should have been switched to precision strikes on communication nodes and ports. Your opinion will help us better understand the logic of those events. The third and most powerful strike occurred on February 26th. Almost 900 aircraft, an incredible concentration of aviation for that time. Golovanov's headquarters exuded confidence in the final crushing of the enemy. But it was on this night that the most massive failure occurred. Of over 1,000 tons of dropped metal and explosives, only 5% reached their target. The main bulk of the ammunition once again fell into the bay and forest areas. Few notice that on this night, Finnish artillery used the method of barrage fire by sectors, creating a wall of explosions in the path of the aircraft. This did not so much shoot down the planes as it forced pilots to prematurely jettison their bomb loads to allow for maneuver and retreat. Here we approach the second point of serious doubt in the official version. After the raids ended, the Soviet press and reports to Stalin screamed about the complete destruction of Helsinki. There was talk of dozens of ruined factories, a destroyed port, and thousands killed. However, When Soviet representatives arrived in Helsinki after the conflict, they were astonished. The city stood virtually unharmed. University buildings, government quarters, residential homes, everything was in place. How could Golovanov explain this paradox to the Supreme Commander-in-Chief? There is a version that Stalin, knowing the real state of affairs through intelligence channels, simply used the myth of the crushing blow as a trump card in negotiations, unwilling to admit the fiasco of his beloved aviation structure. It was a political game where real casualties and destruction were less important than the created image of invincible might. Marshal Golovanov's personal conflict lay in his obsession with the idea of absolute weapon. He came from civilian aviation, a man who believed in numbers and graphs, but often ignored the human factor and the enemy's ability to adapt. His ambitions dictated the need for reports of grandiose successes, which led to a chain of information distortion from bottom to top. Each flight commander, fearing reprimand for inaccuracy, attributed a direct hit to himself, and at regimental headquarters, this data was summed up and transformed into a city in ruins. This was an ideological conflict between a centralized, rigid reporting system and the flexible, innovative defense of a small state. An unusual fact: during the most powerful raid on February 26th, some cafes and even cinemas in basement premises continued to operate in the center of Helsinki. The city residents, who disciplinedly went to shelters, returned to their usual activities just 15 minutes after the all-clear signal. This calm was a result not only of courage, but also of the realization that the main threat was passing them by. The smell of burning in Helsinki's air defense headquarters that night mixed with the aroma of strong coffee. Finnish officers worked calmly, watching on radar screens how Soviet armadas repeatedly fell into the trap of their decoy fires. The transformation of the perception of this event began much later. For a long time in domestic historiography, the raids on Helsinki were presented as an example of the effectiveness of long-range aviation. But if we peel back the layer of propaganda, we see a strategic failure. Yes, Finland eventually left its alliance with Germany, but this happened thanks to the Red Army's land victories in Karelia, not because of the night bombings of the capital. Moreover, these raids only rallied Finnish society around its government, causing the opposite effect of the expected demoralization. The culmination of this entire story came in September 1944, when the ceasefire declaration was signed. When Soviet generals had the opportunity to personally inspect Helsinki, a heavy silence hung in the air. The scale of the discrepancy between reality and the reports of the Sovinform Bureau was frightening. The third point of doubt: were light traps the only reason for the failure? Some modern researchers point to systemic errors in navigator training and the lack of experience in coordinating such a large number of aircraft in a limited space. Night flights in northern conditions are aerobatics, and it turned out that even Stalin's falcons could not always cope with the technical and psychological pressure. The resonance of these events is felt even today. The history of the Helsinki bombings teaches us an important lesson about the fog of war and the danger of self-deception in military planning. In the era of modern, high-precision systems, we still face the fact that victorious reports can be merely a product of imagination and a bureaucratic desire to please the leadership. The universal human truth here is that arrogance and underestimation of the enemy, covered by powerful technical resources, inevitably lead to a loss of connection with reality. The Finnish example shows that intelligence, cunning, and skillful use of geography can negate a multiple numerical superiority. Concluding our audit of this historical operation, we return to that icy night of February 1944. We see hundreds of planes turning back, leaving behind not a destroyed city, but untouched forests, illuminated by the flames of false bonfires. In the cockpits of the pilots, there is fatigue and confidence in a duty performed, while below in Helsinki, Colonel Jokipaltio switches off the radar, knowing that his city is saved. This story is not just about aviation or anti-aircraft guns. It is a story about how easily truth dissolves in the smoke of battles, and how important it is today, decades later, to put it back in its place, analyzing not slogans, but facts. Today, when we assess the power of modern air forces, it is worth remembering the sky over Helsinki. It is a reminder that true strength lies not only in the number of bombs, but also in the ability to adequately perceive reality, however inconvenient it may be for staff offices. I hope this investigation has allowed you to look at familiar historical myths differently and understand that behind every line in a history textbook lies a complex, contradictory, and endlessly interesting human drama. 82 years after those events, the Baltic Sea still holds hundreds of unexploded shells on its bottom, silent witnesses to that grandiose miscalculation. They lie in the silt, covered with rust, like many other myths about the infallibility of military geniuses. And as long as we are able to ask questions and doubt official versions, history remains a living process, not a frozen monument of stone and bronze. Thank you for your attention to detail and your desire to seek the truth with us. Stay tuned, there are many more untold secrets ahead, waiting for their hour. By the early 1940s, the concept of strategic bombing was considered the ultimate solution to any interstate disputes. But the example of Helsinki showed that even the most perfect war machine can be deceived by simple human reason, if that reason acts unconventionally and boldly. This is the main lesson of that distant northern winter, which forever changed our understanding of the effectiveness of aviation in a real, not paper, conflict. In conclusion, I would like to recall the words of one of the participants in those events, who years later admitted that the most terrifying thing for him that night was not the anti-aircraft wall of fire, but the silence that fell when he realized they were bombing emptiness. This silence still echoes in the archives, reminding us of the price of mistakes and the value of an objective view of the past. Every decision made by a military commander is not just an arrow on a map. It is the fate of thousands of people and the future of entire nations. And our task as researchers is never to forget this responsibility, analyzing the events of bygone days with a cool mind and a fervent desire for truth. Summing up our research, it can be confidently stated that the bombings of Helsinki in 1944 became a unique example of victory without battle for one side and defeat in triumph for the other. The Finnish capital withstood not thanks to a miracle, but due to precise calculation and the ability to exploit the enemy's weaknesses. Soviet aviation, in turn, received a harsh but important lesson, which, unfortunately, was not learned immediately and not by everyone. But that is an entirely different story, to which we will certainly return in our subsequent episodes. Stay with us, explore the past, ask uncomfortable questions, and remember, the truth is always deeper than it seems at first glance. This is the magic of history, which never ceases to amaze us with its twists and paradoxes, even after many decades. See you in new broadcasts, where we will continue our journey through the labyrinths of time, revealing the most hidden pages of human achievements and delusions. History does not tolerate the subjunctive mood, but it demands honesty. And if today we can openly discuss the mistakes of the past, it means we have come one step closer to not repeating them in the future. Helsinki in 1944 is not a disgrace or a triumph in its pure form. It is a complex lesson in courage, cunning, and systemic errors, which will forever remain in the annals of military science as an example that in the confrontation between man and system, victory often belongs to those who can think, not just execute orders. In the cockpits of the long-range aviation planes then sat heroes, ready to give their lives for their homeland. Their personal feat is beyond doubt. But the tragedy was that this feat was used by a system that valued reports above results. And it was this discrepancy that became the main reason why thousands of tons of explosives did not reach their target. We pay tribute to all participants in those events while striving for the most objective and unbiased analysis of their actions. Concluding this cycle of reflections, we return to the beginning, to the smell of makorka and ozone in the bomber's cockpit. That flight ended long ago, but its lessons continue to live on. And as long as we remember them, we maintain a connection with reality, which is always richer and more complex than any official schemes. This is our goal, to find grains of truth in the flow of time and share them with you. Thank you for walking this path with us. Ultimately, history is not just dates and numbers. It is a story of human choice. The choice of a commander making a decision at headquarters, and the choice of a pilot pressing the release button. The choice of an anti-aircraft gunner looking at a radar screen, and the choice of a city resident turning off the light in their window. All these small decisions on that February night came together to form the overall picture that we today call the defense of Helsinki. And in this picture, every stroke is important for understanding how the history of great powers is created and destroyed. We are ending our story, but the search for truth continues. Every new detail, every document found adds color to this canvas. And we promise you that we will continue this work no matter what. Because knowing the truth is the only way to respect the past and build a worthy future. See you again on our channel, where history comes alive in details and facts inaccessible to a superficial glance. May the sky over Helsinki and all cities of the world always remain peaceful, and may the only place where such battles occur be the screens of your monitors and the pages of historical works. With this, we conclude our audit, and thank you for being with us in this deep dive into one of the most intriguing pages of World War II in the North. By early April 1944, a lull had set in. The roar of aircraft engines subsided, but the echo of those events resonated in diplomatic corridors for a long time. Finland drew its conclusions, the Soviet Union its own, and the city of Helsinki, practically untouched by the fiery storm, continued to live, becoming a symbol that even in the darkest times, there is room for reason and effective action. With this, we conclude today's narrative, but we invite you to further dialogue in the comments. Your participation is what inspires us to create new, even more detailed and profound materials. See you soon in new videos, where we will continue to unravel the mysteries of world history.